Right now. Let me close this. Okay. So we are live right now, and last month in October was Domestic Abuse Awareness Month, and our church did an event. I guess, Matt, you kind of initiated that event because our church hasn't really ever done an event on domestic abuse.
Yes.
I can remember. I don't think Calvary Boise has ever done anything like that. I was really excited about it. I couldn't go, but my friend kind of FaceTimed me, and I heard your story and the song you wrote for your mom who was shot at a church parking lot
Yes.
by her abuser as she was trying to separate from him. So that really touched me, and the song you dedicated to your mom. And I just would love I reached out to you to see if you were willing to tell your story, because I work with a lot of women coming out of domestic abuse, but it's interesting to see the side of someone who's lost their mom to it. I remember sending a group text to my fellow single moms who come out of domestic abuse, and they were like, wow, that could have been us. And so I know through that, God has given you a heart for speaking out about domestic abuse, and also you have a ministry. So I just want you to share your story, because I think it's so powerful, because we talked on the phone, I think last week, and no one would have ever thought that this man could have taken your mom's life, correct?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to hear your story and what God has laid on your heart to share.
Yes. So, yeah, my name is Matt Herrera, and yeah, a lot of this ministry was birthed out of my mom and stuff, and it's been a ministry that's been on my heart for a while now. Maybe ever since I became a Christian, I've always had a heart for just broken people, but I didn't know that this ministry would just be birthed through just my mom's death and experiencing that, and just God just speaking me through this past year, just to do more in that area. And so with a lot of my mom's story, just to give people a background, my mom was, she was born and raised in California and born in a Christian home. And just throughout her childhood, there's just been many cases where she was abused sexually. And that just really carried on. She never received like any help or anything. And as just the years gone by, just that cycle just of abuse that was just never broken from her and stuff, and just the mental stress and emotional stress that she was going through, it really just carried on through a lot of her future relationships. So a lot of her
Do you know if
abuse,
the sexual abuse was through a family member? Was it through a church member? Do you
yeah,
know?
it was through a family member.
Okay.
And so through her relationships growing up, a lot of those ended up being just a lot of just terrible guys that took advantage of her and stuff. And just a lot of her childhood trauma just wasn't fixed. She never got any help. So yeah, and then a lot of that just family just kept hidden, so she just wasn't able to receive the help that she needed. And just going to her future relationships, I think that's when a lot of the abuse started taking place. And one would be my dad, who went to prison for about 10 years and stuff. And us growing up in just that household, a lot of things were kind of hidden. I mean, there was a lot of like fights growing up. And one story just to highlight, to really understand the abuse that my mom went through, was there was one where she was pregnant with my little brother, and they got in a fight and stuff, and he pushed her, and she ended up falling, while being pregnant. And my older sister, so I grew up in a family of 9, so there's a lot of us. And so there's definitely my mom's story, there's definitely a lot of different like dynamic pieces. I'm only able to share like my personal experience with that.
And
But
Matt,
yeah,
people that I be asking question? I see there's a lot of people watching. So I might, as you tell your story, if there's questions, I might ask you as people are
Yeah.
asking. So yeah, so there was the incident where your mom was pregnant with with your brother, the youngest,
Yeah.
and your sister was there.
Yeah, my older sister Ashley.
Okay. And what happened? And
So yeah, he pushed her, and then my older sister ended up calling the cops,
okay.
and the cops ended up coming down. But in that situation, my sister explained that the cops, my dad was really good at just like manipulating the situation, making my mom look like, she was the one to blame and stuff. And there was a point where he said, yeah, she tried to throw a stool at me, but my sister said it was like in self-defense, like, he was attacking her. And the cops like immediately took, my dad's side and didn't listen to my mom and stuff. And he was really good at just, turning the situation and putting it on her. And she ended up going to jail for 3 nights while being pregnant. And
Wow.
yeah,
This
my
is
grandpa.
so important, especially with the Gabby situation. That our law enforcement can understand the dynamics of domestic abuse, how it's turned around, where the wife is portrayed, or the person who's being abused is portrayed as the violent one or the crazy
Yeah.
one. And it works. And I've seen it work at church where the pastors are confused and they don't take sides, or they take side of the abuser. And so this is so important. So your mom, who was victim of domestic abuse, it was not detected by the authorities. Not only that, she ended up being in jail for 3 days being pregnant.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was just like one of the many situations growing up in that household and stuff. And they ended up getting a divorce later on. But then there's maybe a couple, a few other guys. Uh, yeah, and then I would say the main abuse started. So back when I was in 8th grade is when she met her husband to be, so Matthew Montoya. So he is the guy that killed her. So they were with each other for a long time. So it started back when I was in 8th grade, and that's when we met him. And a lot of the abuse started pretty quickly, but it was pretty much contained with just my siblings. Like we knew like what was going on and stuff, but we tried to, it just escalated quickly.
And then
um
after what happened with your sister calling the cops and having your mom go to jail, of course, there's probably that fear of what can we do? Last time we called authorities, she
yeah.
ended up being blamed. So you don't know what to do also.
Yeah, and that's where, I'll lead into like, her relationship with this guy, because a lot of my mom's background growing up and stuff, there was just so many cases where these guys had fear and control over her and stuff. So leading into this relationship with Matthew Montoya, things just like escalated really quickly. And one thing to paint a picture of who this guy was, he was really good at just manipulating women and stuff. And my mom was a single mother for a while at this point, trying to raise our kids and stuff with the help of my grandparents. So she was pretty, she was looking, for a good, like father figure and
For
stuff, and just that role model and that support and stuff. And she was, she wasn't at the best place herself, but that's like, one thing to keep in mind, to also highlight like a lot of single mothers that come from, like
a
divorce
lot
and
of
stuff.
and a lot of single moms I work with, they have young kids and they are looking for a role model. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons they're drawn into more another relationship, is they want their kids to have a male role model growing up. So and
Yeah.
and that's one of the struggles as a single mom. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we ended up meeting, Matthew Montoya through church and stuff. So he was really portrayed as this like godly person. He was heavily involved in church and just multiple ministries. And
Wow.
so from the outside, he looked like, pretty good, decent guy. And but in the inside, there was just a lot of things that he was really good at keeping hidden. He's had, just like past a past marriage too that was really abusive. And yeah, he has like a whole record of stuff.
But no
Just
one
like
knew
going
that.
back years.
No one knew this, and he was serving at the church.
Yeah.
Just a little question for you, because I met my abusive husband at church because I thought this is where you meet your future spouse. Does it, are you more cautious, I guess, with people in ministry now? Wondering like because I have to say I am. It's really
Oh
hard
yeah,
for
no.
me to trust people. And I don't immediately develop a sense of confidence. I kind of watch, and it's still in the back of my mind because my husband was doing ministry, and you're like, okay. And knowing the fact that a lot of abusive people, I'm not saying all, and again, I get messages saying not all churches are bad, not all churches are bad, not all
Right.
pastors. A lot of abusive people are drawn to a place of power, so they love doing ministry.
Yeah.
And so that I have struggled with that. I don't know, have you struggled with that from what happened with your uh stepfather with,
Oh yeah. I would say definitely, yeah, more this year than ever. It's definitely just like opened to my eyes because of how this stuff happens. Like it happens, more than it should and stuff, and it's definitely not talked about. So you definitely want to go into, like ministry with discernment and
so
stuff. And
you
it's
have to.
sad that you have to do that, but that's like the reality that there are people.
Unfortunately, you should be able to feel safe in a ministry church or with
Yeah.
ministry leaders. But Hebrews 5, I think it's the last few verses, talks about mature Christianity, and it talks about how through they have learned to discern between good and evil. You should good and evil should be easy to discern. But the Bible talks about mature Christians, they have learned through practice to discern between good and evil, because it's so hard to discern, because a lot of times the evil looks like good. It's a wolf in a sheep clothing. So you wonder, you don't want to give grace, you don't want to judge. So you wonder, like, I see a little bit of bad behavior, but that can't be. And so when you're a babyer Christian, I guess you're gullible. You kind of think everyone at church is safe, everyone's okay. And then as you grow older, you kind of learn to discern and kind of watch and learn what, kind of, you mature through that. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that your stepfather, what was his name? Sorry, I'm really bad.
Matthew Montoya.
Yeah, he was a leader. So here's your mom with young kids wanting a role model. What better than a man who's serving in a church and is regarded as this godly man? So great. Like a lot of single moms would fall for that. A man serving in
Right.
ministry with young kids. You want role model. And so, and it's a guy at church. It's not like someone at a club or a party. It's someone who's, you meet at church. So they met when you were in the 8th grade.
Yes.
Okay. And you had younger siblings.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm right in the middle. So I'm like the fifth child.
Okay.
So yeah. Yeah, back to us first meeting him. I would say like it took, at least for me, from what I can remember, um, within that first year, ending up until the end of my ninth grade year, there was a lot of stuff that just happened. Just many red flags that we could see in this guy and stuff, and how he started to treat my mom. And just within that year, there was just times that we had to call the cops because my mom ended up, they had a kid together, and a lot of the abuse escalated when they had the kid and stuff. So he would use my little sister to just manipulate my mom and gain control and stuff, and would threaten my mom's life and threaten to kill their daughter. And
Wow.
yeah.
Ever leak to the church? Did this ever go to the church leadership or anyone saying, hey, this is what's going on?
Yeah. See, I don't know too much, and I wish I could had talked to my mom more. But I know there was a lot of people that my mom had reached out in the church and stuff. And I don't know the details details like of those conversations, but we did know, like as a family, like there was people that knew and stuff, and my grandparents knew, and a lot of other people that we tried to tell. My mom would reach out eventually, but yeah, no one at times could believe her and stuff, and a lot of it was in her circle of friendship with Montoya,
Mm.
and he was really good at just, those people would like, oh no, not Montoya, or they just would really not believe the situation.
Yeah, because he's this godly man who's serving at the church. And
Yeah.
this, to make clear, this was not happening in Boise. Your mom was in,
Yeah, this was all mostly in California.
oh, it was California, because when she died, it wasn't in California. They had moved to another state, correct?
Yeah, they had moved to another state.
So all of this with Matthew serving in the church, this was a church in California
Yes.
at that time. Okay, so they're still in California. You guys are still in California. And then,
Yes.
so she had shared, she wasn't necessarily quiet about it. Your grandparents knew there was a handful of people that she'd shared with.
Hmm.
And so, but nothing really had happened.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah, nothing happened.
Okay. And then what happened after that?
So yeah, things definitely started to take a role. It was the end of my freshman year. I just started my summer vacation, and there was an incident where he had held my mom hostage at a place that he was staying at, and he held her, locked in the room, and was he also had my sister Mary in there, and she was a newborn baby at the time, and I had to call the cops because he was threatening to kill her or cause harm, and this guy, he was really good at escaping. There's just many times that we've called the cops, and he would get out of there real quick. And another
Because the
thing to add
cops would
too
leave
is
them, or he would leave before the cops
he
came.
would leave before the cops came
Okay.
and stuff. And with this too, because like there's a lot of police reports out there between my mom and Montoya and stuff, and just the abuse that he was doing, or either some of my siblings would call the cops. So there's a lot of reports out there. And the one thing to keep in mind is um my mom, through her whole life, there was just that she wanted help. She wanted help, and no one would believe her. Past husbands or boyfriends were really good at just manipulating her and just instilling fear. And at this point with this guy, he used like religion to control her. He used even the legal system, because a lot of my siblings, we can say, he used to say, oh, I know people, and he had like a lawyer and stuff. I don't know how many lawyers, but he knew people like in the legal system that would cover for him, and he would use that against my mom, and my mom would say, there's nothing I can do and stuff. Like he knows people. I can't just get out of the situation. I can't just leave. And things also got worse when they had the kid too, because he would use that to her too, and you say, I'll kill our kid and stuff if you leave me. So she felt so trapped. She felt like she couldn't really speak to anyone in church, or anyone in the legal system or cops. And so he had that much fear and power over her, that she
Wow.
really believed that she had no other option.
Yeah. So she's not really believed by the church. Doesn't really feel protected by authorities. He seems to have all the power and has connections with lawyers and authorities. And so she pretty much kind of just decides she can't do anything. So is she
Yeah,
stays.
she just continues to stay in the relationship, and yeah, it just just continuously just gets worse. and
And when do
and
they
that's
move
one
to
thing.
New
Yeah.
Mexico? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, that was just like one thing, because as a kid we would always used to tell our mom like, oh, why don't you just leave him, why don't you just leave him. And I look back now and stuff, and me just being like a new parent, and just taking a step back and understanding the situation, and understanding a little bit about my mom's childhood and just everything that she went through. My mom went through just, just so much pain growing up, just a lot of things ever since she was a kid. And to place myself like in her shoes in that relationship that she had, I can see how, because like so many people thought that she was crazy and stuff. Like he would drive her to the point where he was really good at making her seem crazy, and
I've
like
had
her words meant
pastors tell
nothing.
me, I've talked to pastors where I've tried to explain about the victim, and they say, well, she got angry too, and she was throwing things too. And you're like, I had an interview with Leslie Vernick, and there's something called reactive abuse. You are
Mm,
reacting to something, and the abusers are so good at turning things around where people think you're the abuser, you're crazy. You really don't really have good friends anymore because people kind of think, oh, she's kind of cuckoo, and so they're really good at making the abused person. I was, to this day, I was doing an interview with a Christian magazine or art, and they asked me, they're like, well, we talked to your ex, and he said you have mental illness, you have schizophrenia, and I was like, that is so typical
mm,
for the abuser to make the abused look insane
yeah,
and push buttons, and then to be calm, to push buttons and have someone get worked up, and then to be calm and say, see, she's the problem. And so that it's so hard to understand domestic abuse and to see it, and for people to say, why didn't she walk away? They don't know the dynamic, and they don't know all the things that as you said, you have a 4-month old, and you're a new father, and the things she went through as a child, and the struggles she had in trying to break free, and there's just so much. And then they had a child together, the manipulation that abusers use with children, and having
yeah,
to, I work with a mom right now who's deathly afraid of her child being left alone with the abuser. And a lot of people stay in the marriage because they think if the child is ever split between the two of us, the child's going to get harmed. The courts aren't going to, usually they usually give joint custody. And so for the sake of protecting the children, a lot of women end up staying because they know
yeah,
the children will be harmed.
yep,
And one of my friends, her husband is a porn addict, and he's sexually abused other children, but somehow, right now there's like a supervised visit, but the fear of her separating was, what if the child ends up with him unsupervised? And my
right,
child is forever affected by being sexually abused. So people don't understand all the dynamics of why an abused wife does not leave, and the helplessness. There's a lot of financial issues. I read an article recently by Julie Roys that this pastor who had, I think, sexually abused the flock, they had raised $45 million to help restore pastors, help them, but I'm like, it's so hard to get money to women suffering from domestic abuse to be able to get a lawyer, to be able to get a house, to be able to get safe. Yet millions of
yeah,
dollars are being saved to restore pastors who were the abusers, and nothing in the domestic abuse world. There's really not a lot of people are helping women walk away from a marriage. And
right,
and it's really sad. And I want you to finish your story, but I just want to say your voice is so important because there's not a lot of men out there that are willing to stand up, and as men, to say, this is not right, and I am going to do something about it. And so your ministry, I've shared the link, and I will share it again, but it's so crucial. So I'm so thankful for your voice, but unfortunately we both had to suffer to really have a heart for this.
right,
Like you said, you grew up having a heart for the broken, but really when it affected you in such a crazy way, you never think you're going to be on the news. You never think this person can take someone's life, who
yeah,
is served at the church, who has a good reputation in many ways. And so, but it's sad that we both had to suffer in this way, but God has given you a voice because of the suffering you've gone through. So yeah, so she felt stuck, and she was still in California, right? Did you
yes,
want to say anything more? And then also what happened with the move? What happened that there was a move to another state where she
yeah.
actually,
So yeah, there was just they were all kind of all over the place and stuff. This guy was he was really good at just like living off of other people, and really good at just talking to people, because he had like his little window washing business and stuff, like really small. It was just like just him and his just himself, and he really just relied upon my mom, because my mom, um it was, I think it was during high school, my mom chose to become a nurse and stuff. So she wanted to do something for herself and to be able to provide. Because that's one thing, growing up, we grew up, pretty poor and stuff, and just a single mom. And, there was 8 of us and stuff. So that's a lot of work. And
Wow.
yeah, definitely.
So she
Yeah.
became a nurse.
Yeah. She became a nurse.
Wow.
And yeah, we were definitely, we were so proud of my mom for that. And, but, Montoya, I think he met her around the same time. Yeah, when they're, yeah, it was well before she went to nursing school. They were together. But yeah, he definitely took advantage of that. He'd always lived off my mom, and um because yeah, I know this is like a little different, because I know a lot of like single moms who definitely rely on the abuser and stuff. But like it just goes to show, like even though my mom could like financially support herself, she was in, she wasn't in the best place for so long, just never received the help. And
Well, that
she,
was my story too. I was the provider, and yet I couldn't walk away. My ex didn't believe as a pastor he should work. So I
yeah.
was the provider, but still, just because, like you said, there is a lot of single moms who can't walk away because of finances. But there
Hmm.
are ones like your mom and me that we actually were the provider, but we still couldn't walk away. There's so much in the dynamic of why you don't
Yeah.
walk away. Finances
Yeah.
could be one of them, but not always. Like you said, your mom was actually the one mainly providing for your
Hmm.
family. Yeah.
Yeah. So things, yeah, it just got worse. And, we were all over the place. There was times, a lot of my siblings, we would get separate a lot, just growing up. So there's like bits and times of our lives where we were together and stuff. And there were sometimes, we were living with my mom in Montoya. So a lot of us, we all have like our personal experiences of dealing with this guy's, just like his abuse with my mom, and just the fear and control like he placed on us and stuff. Because, there's many times, growing up, and I was talking to my sister the other day, where I felt really fearful. Like I wish I could have, like stood up to this guy and like protected my mom. And just going back to like the the importance of having like a father figure. And then you go back and look how what God intended and created the family, that the father is supposed to be like the leader of his household, to the protector, and to lead his family. And that's one thing, a lot of us siblings didn't have. And there was many times where in my life, I was like, pretty manipulated, where like, oh, I like this guy that my mom's dating and stuff. He goes to church. And there's times, where I could say myself, like, I was just kind of, even in my mind growing up, like I was twisted, and like I believed him sometimes.
Mm.
And then there was times where I started to see like his true colors, like, no, this guy's evil and stuff. And but you just felt like you couldn't have a voice. And seeing our mom, who felt like she couldn't have a voice, that like trickles down, and you end up believing it yourself, like, man, no one can help my mom, no one can help this situation. And yeah, eventually, as we just got older and stuff, most of my older siblings who are older than me, we were already, just out of the house. So a lot of my younger siblings below me were still living with my mom and Montoya.
Mm.
And it's definitely a very like complicated story in California. Just a lot of different situations that led them to move. And he has family because he grew up in New Mexico. So
Okay.
that is why. Because yeah, we used to go there one summer. We visited. And another thing to keep in mind too is this guy, yeah, he was so good and at just putting on this picture. And he used to do drugs, throughout their whole relationship. but he was really good at hiding that drug addiction and stuff. And he was diagnosed with a lot of like bipolar stuff. So yeah, he had a lot of like just like mental
Oh,
illnesses.
interesting. They're the ones with the mental illness, yet they
Hmm.
make their abused victim look like the
Yeah.
crazy one, but they are usually the ones with the mental illness.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, I can't remember what year it was. It was probably like 4 or 5 years ago when they moved to New Mexico. And yeah, it was definitely like a shook for all of us because one, like, yeah, he had family over there, but I felt like, he also had like a plan to separate my mom from a lot of her family that was in California. So she had no one. And she used to say this all the time because, we would always, we'd my mom would come visit us or we would always speak to her and stuff, and she would tell us all the things that went on over there. And being in a place that she never grew up in, she felt like she had no one. She was isolated out there. And yeah, she was just in a far worse situation. And my little sister that they had, she was growing up too. So she ended up, seeing a lot of his true colors to the point where she was, afraid of her own dad. She knew that he
At
was an
that
evil
time,
person.
when they moved to New Mexico, you guys were all in California except for your little sister who moved with them.
Yeah, most of us were in California, and then I've been out here in Idaho for a while now,
But
and I have family.
at the time she moved, you guys were all in California, and then all of you moved to different locations, right?
I was still out here in Idaho.
Oh, you were okay. You
Yeah,
went
I've
out.
been out in Idaho for a while. I left right after I graduated high school.
Okay. So
Um,
the only one that moved with her was your little sister, the child they had together.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, and then yeah, the majority of my family was still in California at that time. So yeah, yeah, a lot of things, yeah, had gone worse over there. My mom was. It was towards like the end. I would say like the past like 2 years, because there was many times in their relationship. My mom was like, I'm gonna leave. Like this is it. I'm gonna do it and stuff. And she would like get a restraining order. There was times where they separated, but he was just really good at just making his way back into the relationship, and just yeah, it just wasn't healthy and stuff. But that's just the amount of control he had on my mom. So I would say like in the past, like 2 years, my mom was really starting to really fight. And it wasn't until like the last year. So I would say all of 2020, maybe the end of 2019 is when my mom, she wanted to take a stance. She's like, I'm completely done. I see the harm that he's doing to my daughter and stuff. And she's like, I'm ready to like cut this guy off for good. And she was talking to a lot of like cops and sheriffs and stuff, and she ended up making a good friend out there in New Mexico who really was trying to help my mom and support her. So that was really big and stuff for my mom. And yeah, at that time, yeah, my mom ended up kicking him out because she had bought a house, and she ended up kicking him out and was really done. Like there's times that he would come back and stuff. And um the sad thing too is like my mom had gotten like restraining orders, but everywhere my mom tried to go, whether it be at church or some event or friend's house, like he would end up going to her and stuff. So a lot of time like the restraining order like was broken. So like the recent restraining order, before she died, um the court saw it like, oh well, allowed this guy to come back and stuff and be around your child and be around you. So they ended up taking away the restraining order. But my mom, that's like the sad thing. I feel like that courts don't understand is the amount of control and fear that he had on her. That
Mm.
she would just like, she would just like accept it, like, okay, well, I'm trying to get away from him, but he's the one coming to me and stuff. And he would refuse to leave. And yeah, I think that's a lot of things that courts that they don't take in consideration
Yeah, they
of the victim,
probably
because there's
tried
just so
so
many
hard.
things that yeah, like I would say like, domestic violence, it's so complicated. There's so many dynamics of it, and to really understand like, like the victim and everything that the victim has gone through.
Because
I
she
feel
had
like
a
a lot of,
restraining order, but then he would follow her, let's say, to a friend's house, and she would allow interaction with, let's say, your sister and him, or some
yeah,
interaction. And so the courts don't understand. Then they're saying, why, if you're so afraid of him, did you have that interaction?
yeah,
They don't understand the dynamic and how he was persistent in following her
yep,
everywhere. And yeah, at the same time that you're deathly afraid of this person, there is a part of you that's like kind of gives in here and there. And it's this is a huge issue that my prayer, and I want you to tell the rest of your story, but just stopping here, is our courts would understand domestic abuse better,
yep,
even before it gets to the point of physical violence, with the manipulation, with this, the emotional and all of that. And our law enforcement understands it, because even with the Gabby scenario, she took the blame. A lot of times the victims take the
mhm,
blame. And so, and then with the church to really understand the dynamics, it's so hard to see. It's so hard. I compare with lice. I never had lice before, but years ago, 5, 6 years ago, I got some, and I just didn't know what was wrong. My head was itching. You can't see it. Something is
right,
wrong. You can't. So it's so important that we as a society understand it and protect the abuse and oppress. If more than anything, us as Christians should want to do that, because that's the heart of God, is protecting the oppressed and abused. You read it from the Old Testament all the way to the end of New Testament, is all about God's heart for oppression and abuse. So yeah. So anyways, the courts kind of took away her restraining order because she had had a few interactions with
yeah,
with Matthew. And so she didn't have a restraining order when he approached her at the church parking lot and took her life.
no, no. So yeah, my mom would talk to us, and for like the first time in like so long, my mom was ready to like, she was ready to fight for the custody of their daughter and stuff, because there was always like a custody battle going on with that. And she had kicked him out of the house, like things were looking good. She was completely done with this guy. She ended up getting a better nursing job. She ended up becoming a nursing director out
Wow.
there in New Mexico, just a brand new job. Like she was probably only there for maybe like a month or two. And a lot of us, like, yeah, we were hopeful and stuff. And my mom was still continuing to do court stuff with him and stuff, and really just trying to protect herself and my sister. And yeah, it wasn't until October 12th, when she was leaving church. He was waiting out there in the parking lot, and they ended up getting into an altercation. And yeah, he had a gun on him, and he ended up shooting her 5 times. And yeah, she ended up dying out there, yeah, either on the parking lot or on the way to the ambulance. But there was some witnesses that had saw the thing, because it was just right after church and stuff. And he ended up leaving the scene. And one thing, yeah, he tried to go get my little sister, sister, out of school. So yeah, thank God, like the people in the school, yeah, they didn't allow him to get her. And it was just about like a few hours later, there ended up being like a police shooting. So the cops ended up killing him. So yeah, it was October 12th was a crazy day. Things just happened, really quick.
Her sister was at the church school.
Oh no, she was at a separate school location from the church.
Okay. And this was like on a Sunday, Wednesday,
It was on a Monday.
and it was on a Monday church, like a
Yeah,
church gathering prayer or
yeah.
something. Okay. And your mom was young. She was all over the news. I saw some
Mhm.
articles on it, and she was really, how old was your mom when she passed away?
She was 50.
Yeah, she was um and she was getting her life back together. She'd finally drawn boundaries. She
Hmm.
had gotten a good job, and it's just shocking. Did you ever think this would be your life, where your mom's life would be taken by this man? Did you ever think that this man would be capable of something like this?
I think in the beginning we were always fearful because there was just so many crazy times with my mom that she would tell us, or things that we experienced with this guy that we thought, he was going to kill her, but like things never really got to that point. So there was definitely a time where we really believed like, oh, my mom's, he's going to end up killing her. And I think as time went by, at least for me, I just felt like, oh, maybe it's just more just talk and stuff. Like, because there was times, he was like just like a lot of talk just to instill fear.
Mm.
But then like, yeah, just towards the end and when she died, uh yeah, I can't really like speak for my siblings, but like for myself, like I, there was for me, like I wasn't, it's hard and sad to say, but like, at the same time, like I wasn't surprised that he was capable because we all knew what kind of this guy was, just really just an evil guy, like completely evil. So like I wouldn't put it past him, but it's been so long. It's been like more than 10 years in the relationship. So I wouldn't, it was pretty,
Shock.
shocking,
Because
because like, man, like right after all these years, like,
yeah, because initially you felt like he could take her life, but it'd been so many years. But they do say the
yeah,
most,
and just so many,
yeah,
what was
uh,
that?
they do say the most dangerous time for an abused victim is when they are finally separated and getting their life back together.
Yeah.
That's the most dangerous, where
Yeah.
their life
And I
could be.
think that's what he understood too, because I think it finally clicked in his mind. Because like, and even all of our minds, like we really believed my mom, and she was doing it and she was fighting and stuff. And I think he understood because yeah, he had, she had completely cut ties with him, kicked him out of the house, was done.
So
And
he
he
realized
yeah,
he's
he
done.
understood. Yeah, like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get her back. So
I do want
in
to,
his mind,
I listened to, I don't know if is it on YouTube? I listened to the song you wrote for your mom, and at the beginning is the 911 call. And then,
yeah.
uh, so if it's on YouTube, I
Yeah,
would
it's
go.
not released yet.
Okay, it's
I'm
not
working
released.
on releasing it on Spotify.
Okay, because my friend sent it to me, and it was like she'd recorded it when you were singing it, I think.
Oh,
I don't know, but I was really I what tell me when it's released, because it was really powerful, because in it you kind of talk about how this impacted your faith. So how did this impact your walk with God? How did you process this? Because a lot of people coming out of domestic abuse, especially having met their significant other in church, and having God was used to manipulate and keep them in that situation. Scripture was used. It has really impacted a lot of people's struggle and their walk with God, faith. And so, how did this, because I know this actually has strengthened your faith. How did
yes.
this impact your faith? And what was the process of you walking through this with God and trying to wrap your mind around it?
Yeah. So, you know, when we found out, because my sister had called me, um, it was just like a few hours after my mom died. And I was just coming back from, because on Monday we had church meetings and stuff. And yeah, I'm pretty involved in church and other ministries.
Mm.
And, hearing that news, like when your mom is dead, your mind just goes all over the place. And like, you just feel like just like a piercing, like a part of you like just died. And the week just like leading up to it, so a lot of my siblings, obviously we all got together. We ended up all flying out there to New Mexico, and we ended up staying with a good friend of my mom that was helping my mom down there through her whole situation, and she opened up her house to all of us. And we remember going to the crime scene, to the parking lot. And honestly, for a lot of my siblings, it was such like a spiritual experience. Definitely very, heartbreaking, but also just like really like spiritual. Like we felt God's hand like over this situation. And I remember going down there where she laid on the ground. They had cleaned up the scene as much as they can, but there was still, blood stains you could see, and bullet holes on the ground. There was even like some bullet holes on the church, because apparently like he was like shooting all over the place. Like he had shot more than 5 times. But um so yeah, just like going there and just getting on my knees and just praying over that area. A lot of my siblings, myself, like, I just felt, the Holy Spirit and God's presence just like telling me like, God, like, everything's okay and stuff in this horrible situation. I'm going to use it, to glorify me and stuff. And through your mom's death, you're going to end up, impacting a lot of people and stuff. And, I was laying there and just like on that cement where she died, I was just praying to God, like I was just asking him to help me to see the situation how he sees it and stuff. Because from a human standpoint, we look at something so horrible that happened like that, and we can just begin to question God and ask why and stuff, or be angry with God, or you can just end up building all this anger. And so I asked God, like, I want to see this situation the way you want to see it. I want you to help me walk through this and stuff, because I know, the rest of my life is going to be forever impacted, but I wanted to be used by it. I wanted to be a voice, and God gave me a verse, and it was actually a few months before my mom had actually died. This verse just like came to my mind. Like God just like, yeah, it was just like he was just like loudly speaking it to me. And it was in John 16, 33. He was telling his disciples, he's like, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So that verse, I was really just like eating away at it like a few months. I think it was like a month or two before my mom died and stuff. So I was really trying to understand. And it didn't click to me until my mom died and we were down there in New Mexico and stuff. And God was just like really speak to me. He's like, just take heart in me, trust in me and stuff. Even though we go through life and there's going to be a lot of trials and tribulations. But one thing that God spoke to me, he's like, I've overcome the world and stuff. No matter what you go through, you can have victory in Jesus. Even though in this moment, in this time where it looks like Satan has won, like God was telling me, like, no, like, your mom's in a better place and stuff. And through this, Satan may felt like he won the day and stuff, but there's going to be a lot of people that are going to, come to know God or be strengthened in their walk through this story and through this testimony. And yeah, that was just one thing I asked God. It's like, I want to, for this next year, I just want to trust God, through this and stuff. I want to give it to him. I want to look at the situation and I want to use it to glorify God through it. And, it's definitely, yeah, there's definitely some, some hard times and stuff. And it was exactly a month after my mom died, November 12th, is when I found out I was going to be a dad and stuff.
Oh.
And it was pretty heartbreaking and stuff, because my mom, she was because me and my wife had been married for 3 years now, and she wanted grandkids and stuff. So it was definitely, even just through that whole time, like I just felt like it was like a gift from God too. Like it was definitely really difficult to to find out you're being a new dad, but also still dealing with the loss of your mom. But in it, like for me, like God was like just showing me, like, yeah, even though life was gone, another life was given and stuff. And even just like, yeah, through the whole pregnancy process and these just past 4 months, every time like I look at my son, I see my mom and stuff. And the fact that, she would be so proud and stuff and so happy. And like, I do this for my mom, like I do this for my son, I do this for my wife and for my
Mm.
family. And I know there's and just to create awareness and stuff. And it was during the summertime when God gave me that song uh to write and stuff. So I never really done music. I've always loved music and stuff. And I'm part of a ministry that they a lot of just Christian hip hop artists and stuff. So a lot of the guys were able to help me create this song.
Mm.
And yeah, so that through that song, yeah, I talk about just the times of leading up to my mom's death and going through all that, but then how God has just given me like a new perspective and
Mm.
stuff, like a perspective to see through his eyes and to see this situation and to be able to help people who have gone through this and stuff, um through whatever domestic violence, because I know domestic violence can just fall under just so many areas and stuff. And like for my life and stuff, like I've gone through through a bad relationship, and I've been sexually molested growing up, and just like my family dynamic, we've gone through so many things. And just leading up to my mom's death, like God was just telling me, like, this is what I want you to do. I want you to help broken people and stuff, and people who have gone through stuff like my mom. And also just to speak more about it, because one thing I noticed was, like, even in um today's churches, and I'm sure it's not every church, but like I feel like we just don't talk about domestic violence enough. And
No, we
like I'm just
don't.
hoping and like praying to, like, to be a bridge to the gap for that and stuff. And that's why, like, I love your story too, and how you are wanting to focus more on bringing awareness in our churches. Because yeah, that's one thing how we were talking earlier about how Montoya, he used religion and stuff to do all this abuse and stuff.
Mm.
And yeah, that's one thing my heart is too. It's like, yeah, we need to talk about this in churches. How can the church respond? What can we do to help people who are going through this? And I feel like, yeah, there's definitely more we can do.
Well, I
And
mean, that was big that Calvary Boise, I mean, did an event on it. They ended
yeah,
up using the Words of Freedom night for it. But I was like shocked when I heard there was an announcement, because we haven't really talked about this at Calvary Boise at large at the church. And what does domestic abuse look like? It's not just physical, it's all the psychological and emotional stuff that happened in your mom's life, and how it affects also kids, the abuse
yeah,
you went through as a child, sexual abuse and other stuff. Because if we're not protecting the woman, we're not protecting the children as well. And we definitely didn't want our story to be like this. You'd rather have your mom there with holding
right,
your son. I mean, it's heartbreaking. um but I was talking to a friend yesterday. God uses the broken.
yep,
God uses, and it gives you a heart for the broken. And what a better place to be at than with the broken. That's where Jesus is, with those who've been broken and who are hurting. That's the heart of God. And so no one wants to experience brokenness to be able to minister to the broken, but that's how it works. And he's given you a heart, and he's given you a voice. And there's a lot of ministries out there that deal with this, but I see a genuine heart that you have for it. And I watched a lot of testimonies, and I talked to a lot of people. But when I watched you share at our church, and just pouring out your heart of how God has used this for good,
mhm,
it was just really touched me. And I just immediately messaged my friend. I was like, can I get his number? I need to talk to him. And so I just love how you have surrendered this brokenness, and it continues. It's like as your child grows up, there's things that you remember, you think about your mom all the time, of how she would have enjoyed being a grandma, how, all of this. And so the pain will always be there in a way. But it's how God has used it in your life to strengthen your faith and have you be a voice for this is pretty amazing. And I say this a lot. There needs to be more men out there speaking about this. There's a lot of women, but there's not a lot of men that are saying this is not right. The vulnerable, the women, children need to be protected, because when the woman is not, then the child is not protected. And we talk about the divorce rate so much, like the divorce rate is so high, but we don't say why. Why is it so high? Why did your mom have to go from relationship to relationship?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's address that instead of thinking a divorce is going to impact the child negatively. No, the abuse that's happening, that's causing the divorce, is impacting the child negatively. So instead of being so, in the Christian world, even being so worried about divorce, let's look at the cause of it, and let's help those who are being abused. Let's bring the woman and children in a healthier place. Maybe divorce will happen like it did in my case and many women I know, but the woman and children are safe. The children are growing in a healthy environment. So even if the marriage falls apart, so what? I mean, I know God is for marriage, but not when it's abusive. God in a Christian marriage, the man is put there to protect, not to harm. If the man is harming, then that, if it's okay if the marriage falls apart, let it fall apart, and let us gather around. I mean, look at the woman that followed Jesus. Look at the woman at the well. She'd had many marriages, and yet we shun these kind of, oh, you've been divorced a few times, oh, like that's bad. But those are the people that Jesus chose to follow him, to minister to him, to, as disciples. And so I am just so thankful for your voice. A lot of people that follow me on social media, they followed me because of persecution, of my Christian persecution. So a lot of them are just getting educated on what abuse is. And like, I've had the question of, why did you fight for him? Or how could you not have walked away earlier? Because I was beaten up to a point of death when I was pregnant with my daughter. And I didn't leave. And so, there's a lot of people that are trying to understand domestic abuse. So what would you say to people who are just starting to understand it, and also to people who are in it? Because I know there's people that contact me that are still in it and are just so, it's hard, like it was with your mom, to leave. They seem to be stuck. And so what would you share? Like, what's the final word you would want to share with people who are watching? And
for people who maybe don't know too much, like about, domestic violence, or if you hear about it, one thing I would say is, if you know someone or you're talking to someone, have compassion for those people and stuff. And even if you don't understand, but like, by just being there and like listening, and sometimes those people like need you to be a voice for them, because those people are those people can be in such fear and stuff. They might open to you about a certain situation, but to have compassion towards the situation, and to try to be understanding and patience, and to speak up and stuff. Because I know a lot of people can be, if it's a close friend, or you're afraid of like maybe hurting that marriage or that relationship or whatever they're in by saying something, but oftentimes those people feel like, they don't have a voice. So by, you being the person to bring this up or to speak up, trust God, trust God with the situation, pray about it. But, that's just having, like the integrity to speak up and to be bold and stuff. And especially as Christians, that's, that I feel like that's our obligation to look out for one another. There's that verse, like, we're our brother's keeper and stuff. We have to look out for people who are other believers, and anyone, that fact, to do the right thing and to be bold and just to speak up.
And to have this passion that the name of God would be represented correctly, to say, no, not in my house, not in my church. Christian marriage should not be like this. Abuse, carrying the name of Jesus and abusing people should not be. This is not okay. This is dishonoring God. This is misrepresenting him. And this is the most evil form is using God's name and having his name and carrying his name and abusing. That's when Jesus called out. If you don't have a heart for it, ask for a heart for it, because Jesus called out abusive leaders all the time. Paul called out abusive leaders all the time. That is so dear to the heart of God, that people that carry his name to be abusing his bride, to be abusing their spouses, to be abusing their church as pastors. And that is so dear to the heart of God. And that's where Jesus, was so vocal about it. Each individual voice can bring a change. When Saeed went to prison, I was a stay-at-home, I was a working mom in Boise, Idaho. No one knew who Nagme was. But as individual voices started speaking out about Christian persecution and so on, and the Iranian government, being such an evil government, was affected by it because there were so many voices. And our government, people called our senators, our congressmen, our, government was impacted as a result. So I believe this is, calling out persecution's wonderful, but this is close to the heart of God. Abuse that's happening in the name of God, and each individual voice counts at your church, your government officials saying this needs to be addressed, this needs to be dealt with properly in our courts, with our law enforcement. And that's how, this is what I believe we're trying to solve we're trying to become a better community. I believe it's when a family is safe. We thought so many years, I heard, if we bring down the divorce rate, then there's going to be whole families. There's not going to be kids without a father. Then it's good. That's not the case. It's actually addressing abuse. If kids can grow up in a safe environment, if women can grow up in a safe environment, there's also men that are abused, but majority are women, then we were going to see a better society. We're going to see change in society in ways that we wanted. And so I just encourage everyone to use their voice. Even if you haven't been impacted by domestic abuse, use your voice. The whole site thing went from a handful of people to close to 1 billion people were impacted and were speaking out about domestic persecution. I believe that each individual voice can cause a movement regarding abuse, whether domestic or if a church is not handling it right, that needs to be addressed as well. So I just encourage you. I'm going to share on a separate post Matt's the ministry he has started. Ask you to just come alongside him and his family and be a support and be a voice, share, speak out, talk to your pastors, come alongside of a woman that says she's being abused, and just keep speaking. My church I don't think we have an abusive leadership, but they are just starting to understand it. And there's times where I'm like, I'm done, I'm done talking about this. I just want to move on, maybe find a church that understands it fully. But I feel like I need to stay and continually speak, even though it's exhausting, to say, no, this is how it needs to be dealt with. And so each person can be a change in their community. And that's where we're going to see impact in our community when we address abuse.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you so much for your time. I hope to just work with you more. I just love what God is doing in your life. And if anyone wants to contact Matt, I will share the ministry page. You can contact him through that. It's Life Story, right? Life Story Ministry.
Yeah, Life Story Ministry.
And you have one on Instagram as well.
Yes.
Okay. So Instagram and Facebook are your main where people can message you and contact you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And thank you so much, Nagme, for just this opportunity. And it's just been a huge blessing to be able to speak about this very important topic.
Well, God has got his hand on you. It's not an accident that I saw this, and the Holy Spirit just prompted me to reach out and uh, just keep going at it. This is an area where you just keep having to speak until a change comes. It took 3.5 years of me constantly speaking out before my ex was released from prison. Sometimes it takes a few years of just going at it until you see change. And I do believe God is behind this. There's a movement, and he
Absolutely.
will continue to guide you and bless you. And so you have my support. Thank you for your time. And I think there's a lot of comments I couldn't read. So we can go back and answer some of those questions. But if you have, you want to contact Matt, I'll share his ministry page after this. So it's on the link, but I will do a separate post with his ministry. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think